Can't touch the bottom with the 10-foot pole, oh, a doo-da-day. Hello and welcome to my review of It, the novel, Chapter 9. This chapter is entitled Cleaning Up, and in this chapter, we sort of get the same format again, but this time, Bev Marsh is the main character. So we start the chapter off with Bev going back to Derry, and then we end up going back in time. This time she's on the flight. Last time we were with her, she was with her husband, and they got into a fight. He is very abusive, and she left the house. And now she's on the plane heading back to Derry. She talks to a man on the plane, and she has a laughing fit the same way that Richie did. But she tells the man later that she doesn't want to talk to him because she's just so focused on what's coming up. We kind of flash back a little bit, and we find out that Bev stayed with one of her friends who picked her up and was very glad for her that she left her husband because he was such a bad person. But she tells her friend that she can't tell her what's going on. We get this kind of again with a main character heading back to Derry and people wanting to know what's going on, asking, why are you going there? Why are you so worried? And the character saying, I wish I could tell you, but I can't. So we get that again, and we sort of get this thing with the laughing. Maybe it's because their memories are flooding back and they're getting the good as well as the bad. I'm not sure, but it seems to be touching on that again. Just like before, as I said, we flash back to the 50s, and Bev has just come back from her movie that she went to see with Ben and Richie. And you realize that she does not yet know what's happened in the previous chapter, and she doesn't actually know what's happening with all the other kids. She comes back from the movie, and she's in good spirits. She had a great time. In this chapter, we also learn that she probably has a thing for Bill Denbrough, but not Ben. So that doesn't seem to be reciprocated, but Ben seems to be very nervous around her, and it's a very interesting dynamic. She's thinking about this good day. She goes into her bathroom and she's getting ready for the night, and she hears these voices coming up from the sink, and they're saying, help me, and she's sort of very perplexed about what's causing this to happen, and blood spurts up from the sink, and it gets everywhere, and she understandably freaks out about this, runs out of the bathroom and goes and gets her father. In a previous chapter, we learned that her father is also abusive. The relationship that she has with her father sort of mirrors the future relationship she has with her husband, unfortunately. Her father comes into the bathroom, and it becomes apparent that he can't see this blood. This blood is supposed to be everywhere. He can't see it anywhere. I liked how this was described because here he is washing his hands in a bloody sink and drying his hands on a bloody towel and looking around wondering what's wrong with Bev. He ends up hitting her, and she finally just says it was a spider. And it flashes back to this disturbing thing her father said to her once, which was he would never hit her if she didn't deserve it. And he's saying, I worry about you, and he's slapping her around. And after she tells him it's just a spider, after she lies about that, he sort of becomes amused and says, oh, I wish you would have just told me it was that. Then I would have never hit you. So he's very cavalier about this, and in this chapter also we see that he's very controlling of his daughter and his wife, demanding that they get the house ready, not letting them disagree with him in any way. So Bev is very much trying to balance the horror of what she's just seen with the horror of dealing with her father. Something else I'll mention, this chapter does say Bev loved her father. This sort of highlights the horror of abuse happening inside of a relationship where there's trust. This doesn't portray this relationship between her and her father like she just hates him. She's a little kid, that's all she knows. And that's what's so horrifying about this type of abuse that goes on. It's that it's in a relationship where there's trust, and yet one person is treating the other person like less than a human being. So after this encounter in the chapter, Bev reunites with the rest of our heroes, except for Richie and Bill, because the other kids don't know about their adventure that they had in the last chapter yet. But Bev goes and she's playing sports with the rest of them, and she finally just breaks down. She's very upset, and she tells them what happened, and they tell her, "You're not alone," and slowly they start recounting their stories and telling her what's going on, which really scares her. But again, Stanley's not wanting to tell his story. Eventually they end up going back to Bev's house, and they help her clean up her bathroom. It's a very sweet scene. They're very supportive of her. They end up going to the laundromat, and they're still being supportive of her, especially Ben. And that's when they finally get Stanley to tell his story. Stanley's story was interesting but predictable. Stanley went inside of this thing in the Barrens, this big old water tower thing. I don't remember what it's called. I think it's called the standpipe. There's some stories about how some children drowned inside of this standpipe, and Stan is down in the field, and for whatever reason he seems drawn into this little staircase inside the standpipe. This is sort of hitting back on the theme of they seem to be drawn in. They seem to be drawn toward the danger whenever this thing is there. He goes inside there because he was bird watching. He saw it. He went inside the tower, and the door is open because it got blown. It got blown apart, I guess. I know I'm sort of telling this not in the right order, but I was remembering the detail about the birds. About the bird watching after I said that. So he's down there bird watching. He hears this big bang. He goes inside the tower. And he goes a little bit up the stairs because he's starting to hear some carnival music, Camptown Races. And as he's going up, he hears footsteps descending. And they're squishing footsteps. And there are a couple of boys coming down the stairs who are dead. And he turns around and tries to get out, and the door slams behind him. And for whatever reason, he starts naming birds from his bird book. And this makes the dead things weaken a little bit, and it opens the door, and he gets away and pedals away. I think he took his bike down there. He either took his bike or he ran. One of the two. He gets away from there pretty quickly. And I'll say this real quick. Nothing in this chapter really scared me. I wasn't really frightened by anything I read. I knew the sink thing was going to happen because I was looking up a video about it, and someone mentioned the thing about the sink. So I at least knew something like that was coming up with Bev. But even the thing with the standpipe, these things are getting kind of predictable to me. So they're not nearly as frightening. What I did like, though, was what Stan said after he encountered this thing with the standpipe when he's talking to the other kids. Because he basically says, I don't want to deal with this because this isn't how things are supposed to be. Or at least that's what he's saying in his head. He said, this is offensive to me. It offends my sense of security. Because if I cannot judge the world for how it is, if the monsters are real, then that's just too horrible to think about. He wants a world where things are logical and make sense. And if he suddenly learns that all this stuff is possible and all these supernatural things are occurring, then the world gets so much more complicated and scary. And I really liked that part. But overall, this chapter, I liked it. I liked the connections between the characters especially, but it wasn't very frightening to me. I was kind of hoping to get some good scares. It wasn't all that frightening. Something I keep forgetting to mention, though, is this thing about them descending into the kingdom of the Morlocks. Bev's chapter didn't say that, but there was a couple other chapters that mentioned that. I kept meaning to say something about it, and I just kept forgetting. This is an analogy that's used, and it basically is something I think that's from Narnia, and it's just talking about descending down into a deep kingdom and basically leaving the world. So I like that. And I almost moved on without talking about the end of the chapter. I almost was ready to sum up this video without actually talking about what happens at the end. They're at the laundromat to wash the rags, and it's interesting that too, because Bev and the kids are the only ones who can see the blood. The adults can't see the blood. only they can, but they're still washing it because Bev doesn't want to see the blood. We get to the end of the chapter, Bev goes back into her bathroom, and for whatever reason, maybe it's because of the curiosity that's caused by the monster, she sticks a tape measure down into the sink, and she keeps stretching it down there, and something starts pulling the tape, and then it snaps back. It snaps back in there, and as the tape measure goes back into the container from the sink, then there's blood on the end of it, and Bev runs to the kitchen to wipe the blood off the end of the tape measure, and it's dripping on the floor, and she's basically just ruined all their work, and she can now see it again, and she just breaks down at the end of the chapter, and that's where it ends. So, you have her making some very interesting decisions in this chapter. Actually, you have her and also Stan making some very interesting decisions in this chapter. But the Beast is starting to pull them in more. I really liked how we got to see Stan's story. We got to hear more from him because we haven't really learned much about him yet, except for that he died at the beginning of the book. In the future, we get more mentions about them eventually all standing together and pledging their loyalty to defeat this monster if it ever returned, if it ever started again. We get a mention about that. And we get an instance where before Bev puts the tape measure down in the sink, or maybe as she's doing it, the monster says something like, "If you try to stop us, we'll kill you." And she can also hear the voices of people that have gone missing. So that's tying that thing together with, these are children who have gone missing, but she also hears this voice say, "If you try to stop us, we'll kill you." And the mention about them pledging their loyalty to stop it if it ever started again. So, very much connecting everything together. Overall, liked this chapter, liked the character development, just wish it would have been a little bit scarier and less predictable. That is my video. If you like this content, be sure to like this content because I will be making more of it. And until next time, I will see you next time. Bye-bye.